It's just gone 17 after 7. You are listening to Sabah al Muslim on Radio Islam International. Things are picking up here at the precincts of City Hall. We have our first minister for the morning, Minister of Basic Education, Siviwe Gwarube. Minister, thank you very much for your time and welcome to Radio Islam International.
Good morning and good morning to your listeners. It's good to be here.
It's your first SONA that you'll be attending as a minister under the GNU. What are the expectations?
For me, I think firstly, I think it's going to be an interesting State of the Nation. Of course, as you say, it's the President's also his first State of the Nation under the Government of National Unity. But for me, I think the big focus is that we as the 7th Administration have decided that the priorities for the 7th Administration are growth and jobs. And certainly that is something that I believe that education is very integral to that. And so if we're going to be talking about growing the economy and making sure that we've got good quality jobs in the country, then we have to look at where is the conveyor belt for that workforce that you are wanting. The conveyor belt is sitting at basic education. And so while we've seen great strides being made in terms of providing access to basic education in South Africa, we now need to turn the conversation towards the quality of the education that South Africans are getting, particularly at the foundation phase, to make sure that our learners are able to read and read for meaning by the time they turn 10, and that their cognitive development tracks with their international counterparts.
Minister, the BELA Act, this has sparked significant debate with the DA and the national government having conflicting views. How do you plan to navigate these differences and ensure a smooth implementation?
Look, I mean, the implementation of the BELA Act is already underway. Once an act has been commenced with, that then is that. And you will recall at the end of last year that I committed to essentially providing guidelines for schools, for SGBs, for provinces on how they navigate this new legislative reality, so that they can be able to be guided by what is required of them while regulations are being developed. But I also made a plea, and the plea was that it's important now that we draw a line under the political contestation that characterized the BELA Act, so that we can now focus on the learners, the teachers, the very people who are on the front lines. And so for me, that's really the focus now. Implementation is well underway, and I just want to make sure that our learners and our schools are not a playground for political contestation, and that we really are focusing on the value of the education that learners are getting.
I want to pick up on a sensitive matter. You know, there's issues around students wearing religious attire, such as the headscarves and beards. This continues to arise, and what is your department's stance on ensuring that the religious students are not discriminated against in schools?
Again, I mean, I think it's absolutely important to understand that schools have to be places of safety, and they have to harness the diversity that every single learner comes in with. And that we do have a policy, in fact, a national policy within the DBE that looks at saying, how do we guide SGBs in being able to say, what are the religious, cultural needs of every single learner? And those should be embedded in the code of conduct of every school. No school can simply say, this is simply not allowed on the basis of spurious grounds. Because, of course, while those guidelines are there and that policy is there, it is founded on the very premise that is contained in our Constitution. And our Constitution is very clear about protecting not only religious rights, but fundamental rights. And one as religion is just as important. So it's absolutely important that if those are not adhered to, if schools are discriminating against learners, and it means that they are in contravention of the national policy which does guide SGBs around the code of conduct, that you can't criminalize, for instance, or punish students for saying either for religious reasons or for cultural reasons. So the rules are there, the policy is there, it's founded and it's anchored in the Constitution.
And then, Minister, you know, there's also the controversy regarding how sexual orientation and gender identity are addressed in school curriculums. You know, many religious communities worry that these topics may conflict with their beliefs. How will the government balance inclusivity while respecting religious values?
I think it's also important to understand what is in the sort of the offering within the DBE. That number one, it's important that there's the government of the day cannot replace the role of parents. Parents are the first teachers of their children. They are the ones that set their value system. They are the ones that teach them about who they are and who as in their place in society. But however, there are obviously reasons why we need to be talking about things like sexual education for reasons of essentially to educate learners, but also for reasons of safety. And by that I mean that we need our learners to understand what is permissible, what is right, what is not right. How do they know when somebody is being abusive towards them? So I think sometimes there's often a misconception that children are being taught or ideologically being indoctrinated about what they ought to believe. And that's certainly not the case. This is a pure, simply an orientation that lives within life orientation that talks just really about how sexual education as we should. But the things around sexuality, gender identity, that resides within the home and what parents should be essentially teaching their children.
We've seen the US President recently commenting on the land expropriation bill, but in specific to your ministry, he also spoke about, he made the pronouncement on the gender issue in his inaugural address. Do you see yourself taking any cues from there, or South Africa adapting any stances based on that?
No, not at all. I mean, I think that's a president of another country expressing their views in his inaugural speech. I think we're really good in South Africa in the sense that I think our views and our policies are really anchored in our constitution, and it's really good to be part of a country that has is part of a constitutional democracy, because at any times I think we are guided by that, and so I'm comfortable that we are all right, particularly in the space that I operate in.
And then, Minister, what's happening? We see that there's 1,820 vacancies for heads of department in Western Cape alone. What's happening there?
Well, look, I mean, the reality here is that the education sector has been underfunded for a good 10 years. And we are starting to see that reflecting in the number of teachers that we can be able to hire. We're starting to see the vacancy rates in provinces. Provinces are truly struggling. They're struggling to be able to keep the same basket of posts. And this is why even last year I've been making the argument, not only to Treasury, because it's important that it's not Treasury's budget. The budget process and the budgeting process in South Africa belongs to the government. That I've been making the case that it's important that we protect frontline services. And I've been making this case now even with my colleagues and the president to say, at least in this upcoming financial year, we have to start to see a reinvestment within the sector so that we can make sure that we fill these critical vacancies. Because it's not fair not only on the learners, but it's also not fair on the teachers who are going to have to contend with big classroom sizes.
Finally, Minister, how's the overall relationship with the President? Your absence was noted at the signing of the BELA Bill. How have things been?
I think that the President and I have an excellent working relationship. I really, truly enjoy working with him.
Thank you, Minister. All the best
Thank
for
you
the
very
rest of the
much.
day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Yes, that was the Minister of Education chatting to Radio Islam here at the booth at the precinct of City Hall in Cape Town.